Hello, and welcome to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast. In this podcast, we explore and dive into the stress-filled world of high conflict divorce and relationships. We offer solutions to calm your world down and allow for greater positive engagement with your children and the people around you. If you find value in this commercial and advertising-free podcast, please consider donating by pressing the donate button so we can continue our helpful work. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody, to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast with Brooke Olson and my friend and sometimes co-host, Eric Schoberg. This week, we are going to explore a little bit more of the competency matrix. We're going to really focus on the unconscious competence portion of that. We're going to
unconscious incompetence.
I'm going to start all over.
Okay.
Welcome back, everybody, to the High Conflict Co-Parenting Podcast with Brooke Olson and my good friend and off-time co-host, Eric Schoberg. This week is episode 194, Stabilizing in Conscious Incompetence. We're going to explore a little bit more of the competency matrix and really specifically target the conscious incompetence portion of that. So welcome back, everybody, and good morning, Eric.
So good morning, Brooke. It's good to be doing this again with you and kind of playing in the mutual podcast land. Your podcast is High Conflict Co-Parenting and mine is Unveiling Self. And so we have a revisitation and a deepening into the competence matrix. So the competence matrix is a teaching tool that's been around for some time. There are 4 or 5 stages to it. I'll review it for a moment here in looking at the 5 stages. I prefer 5 over 4, and you'll hear that in a moment. So the first being unconscious incompetence. They're all mixes of competence and consciousness. So the second being conscious incompetence, and the third being conscious competence, the fourth being unconscious competence, which is really flow states. It's kind of doing it and being skilled without really thinking about it. And then the fifth is conscious unconscious competence, which is teaching flow states. So my own personal explorations, as well as with clients in the last year or two, has been focusing more and more on learning how to stabilize and even recognize the second stage of conscious incompetence. And the reason is that there's this movement that we do from unconscious incompetence, the rat tangle, the tar pits, if you will, of life, and where that becomes, we'll have moments where we kind of pop up out of that stage. I visualize these stages as horizontal, one above the other, and where that second stage where we begin to become conscious of our incompetence, we are kind of in shock, and we're, especially around arenas of serious incompetence that we might have, we get really upset and we want to move radically quickly into conscious competence. And what inevitably happens, if this is at all around any places where we are truly incompetent, especially in our emotions and our reactivity and our parts, is that a trap door opens in the conscious competence and we go hurtling back down into unconscious incompetence. Do not pass go, do not collect $200, go directly to unconscious incompetence. And then we have to wait however long until we have another moment of conscious incompetence and see ourselves and be like, whoa, I'm really sucking right here. And what I find in myself and in most of my clients is that little place of moving out of the tar pits into some awareness of self and one's incompetence, and back down through the trap door happens many times, dozens, hundreds of times. And it's really uncomfortable. And I believe that it is a necessary movement, that we have to do that a bunch of times until we have a sense of how to do this. And so what we're doing here today is looking at sharing what I've found, what Brooks found, as far as finding ways to stabilize more in that conscious incompetence and gaining more data points, finding like different disparate data points in it that will eventually lead to connect the dots and an organic movement into conscious competence.
When we were talking this morning before we started this podcast, we were talking about really having a conversation initially here about unconscious incompetence and the 3A's, the awareness, acceptance, approval of that component as kind of the starting point in this. And it was interesting to me, the piece that you brought it back down into that, because I've always looked at this awareness, acceptance, approval as a component of the unconscious incompetence, the conscious incompetence, and then the conscious competence components, and being that that ladder, that being a
progression
of the progression of that ladder. And when you brought that back down into starting with those 3A's at the unconscious incompetence level, that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, and I would put it actually not so much centered in the unconscious incompetence as the tools in conscious incompetence to progress through, like there are 3 substages within conscious incompetence itself. So let's hold off on that for a moment,
okay,
because I think it's important to really flush out and detail what is unconscious incompetence. What is incompetence? What does that look like? And my sense of that is that there are an infinite number of things that we can be incompetent at. It's kind of the human condition. We have a lot of stuff that we have there that can be problematic. So dissociation, rage, addiction, denial, hypercognition, fantasy, personality disorders, which you and I have talked a lot about, and that shows up a lot in your work, shame, attachment hunger, helplessness. Add some for me, Brooke, if you have any more.
No, you're nailing it. I mean, these are the places of just the reactivity and the place of not having a foundation in self to be able to reflect, to be able to see where we are lost in those given parts, those lost places in space and time that we're all trying to work through in the various places that we're doing our therapy or explorations in.
Right. I mean, it's basically like becoming aware of where I suck. Where am I really just face planning? And in particular, where am I face planning that I've not seen, I've been blind to? Where are my blind spots to my incompetence, to where I suck, to where I'm not skilled, which I think is an important piece to just review, is that a lot of people that I talk to about this initially have a charge with the term incompetence because they equate it with being an idiot or being stupid or being, it's used as a derogatory term in some places. But if you look it up in the dictionary, which I have a number of times, there's a second meaning that is almost used more often, which is really about being unskilled.
Mhm.
So where am I unskilled in my self-awareness? Where am I unskilled in having a propensity to dissociate, to blame, to do all these things? And, you know, and then where do I judge myself for my incompetence? So it's like fractal incompetence, because when we typically find our incompetence, then we judge ourselves for it. And it's just more and more incompetence. It's like it's rectangle.
Well, our human state starts at a state of incompetence or lack of skill, if you would. And this is the only place that we learn from. This is the only place that we gain awareness from. It's not like this light flashes on and we're suddenly competent. We have to navigate the incompetence or the lack of skill before we become competent or skilled.
Right.
And to accept that, to be aware of that, and then to accept that component as our human state. And
and let's not jump through those steps very quickly.
Right.
Like you sent me a messenger meme this morning, which I thought was super awesome. And it's an image, and it says, "Don't get annoyed by parents asking you stupid tech advice you think they should know. These are the people who taught you how to use a toilet. Just help them." So there's a naming in that thing of the parents' incompetence,
right, and
that reflects back into one's own, like, wow, I didn't even know how to use a toilet back then. Like, you're right. And okay, I can be more compassionate with my parents who don't quite know how to use, some high-tech software.
We haven't been exposed to it. We don't know how to do it until.
Well, and we've, it's like trying to learn how to use a toilet at 60 when you've never used one. It's harder when you're older to learn shit,
Right.
So I think that is, really to familiarize ourselves and to chat, you and I, for just a minute about what does incompetence look like? And, what are the things that you run into in yourself or in clients or friends that you find that are often a struggle to become conscious of?
Well, one of the things that I think for me personally, and what I try to teach to my clients are developing some sense of metacognition, that place of self-observance. And when I am in a place of dissociation or just not being in self, how do I find
whatever that is?
How do I find that?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's elusive. And the tool that works for me is this place of something here is off. I don't know what in the hell it is.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a sensation that comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can find a way into the somatic experience of that, if I can find a way into the body from that.
Which is a tricky one, because some of the places where we have trauma or attachment injury, the body is pretty far down the list of things that we want to start with, because the body can be holding a tremendous amount of overwhelm or, bracing or.
Okay. But that overwhelm or that bracing to me has a sensation that comes along with it. I can look around and go, my heart rate's up, or my stomach's, or my muscles are tight, or whatever that piece is. And that.
But you're very somatically oriented.
Well, I am. But what I also try to do with my clients is help them find that somatic avenue.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it feel like? What do your hands feel like? What does your body feel like in any place that you can identify,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's a hair follicle,
Mm-hmm.
as a place of I'm in existence.
Yeah. So in the IFS world, internal family systems, there are protectors that numb us and dissociate us.
Right.
And so the notion, like with Dick Schwartz's latest book, No Bad Parts, to really inhabit as a human, but also as a coach for people with this stuff, the recognition that parts that are dissociating and numbing aren't bad, and that really we need to have permission to reassociate, to re-embody, and to go really slow prior to that threshold of moving into the competence of being more embodied, even though what we're embodied to is uncomfortable. So to back that up even farther, a lot of what I run into in clients, but also in myself, is these attachment injuries of never really having had, healthy attachment with mother or an attachment figure when I was a kid, to even know what it is that I was missing. Like, it's so far afield and disoriented from being embodied, from being in that deep sigh of being held with love from a parent, a mother that isn't trying to get something from me, which was a lot of where I came from. And so that place of being in my body and slowing that down is not easy sometimes. Like, if I'm triggered, and I have clients that can't even get to that point. So really kind of leaning back and just holding space outside of even embodiment, and to be in the acceptance of disembodiment.
So we're going to have fun today. We started off on some notes, so we're going to have some fun today, guys. From my perspective in that, Eric, in that arena, dissociation has a component. It has a somatic component to it. There's a chaos or a lostness to it.
And there's a sensation to numbness.
And there is a sensation to numbness,
which is really worth chewing on for days or weeks until you can get that.
But within that sensation that comes with those, there's a link back to find some monicum of awareness, some monicum of self in there that can create some monicum of that metacognition, that awareness of there's something else here.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And that being the tether or the beginning points.
Right. And I hear you. I totally get that. That is the movement towards competence.
Right.
And what I'm talking about in this kind of topic is really sitting in my chair, in being aware of the incompetence. Because I've found in myself and I've found in clients that there is a trigger to even just a feather of embodiment in certain areas that lead back into unconscious incompetence.
Right.
And so to be super aware of that and not even go there. So to be aware of that as a practitioner with the person, but to really just sit back and be patient and be curious and help them be curious. Like, what's it like to be floating outside, or to be deeply in hypercognition, or in the moment that you start feeling, you go into nausea or into, falling asleep. Like, there's a lot of places where people can't even get to that place that you just described of the first tiny thread of conscious competence. They can't get there. And so to be more and more aware of just how sensitive that initial trigger can be. It's not always that way. Some people can move right into that. Like I have people that can just roll right into embodiment, but some of those people freak out in the realm of cognition or critical thinking. Like they have the same kind of reaction to sense making, for instance, and they can't hold that. So there's like a number of different arenas that different people have that are explosive and move into the trapdoor back down into unconscious incompetence.
Which is simply reactivity and just trying to navigate the world on a thread of impulse.
Well, and when you say just in that way, there's I hear, I don't know if that's what you meant, but I hear a level of dismissingness of it, dismissive. And what I'm see when I am looking at this is I'm fascinated by just how the school of fish of parts will just bolt and disappear out of the scene without you even knowing. Like I'm reminded of in high school, I did scuba diving and I helped my marine biology teacher, who had a side gig of collecting aquarium fish. This was in Hawaii, and sending them back to the mainland and making a little side money. And so I would go out diving with him and we'd go down, we'd go like way out in the ocean, like 2 miles out to a couple of reefs that he knew, go down to 60 feet and kind of put up a 60-foot net and then go back around and herd the fish into the net. And we were doing this one day, like the 6th time that I'd done it. And, we're herding the fish and all of a sudden, all of the fish are gone. And I'm confused. And I look over at him and he goes like this. And there's a 12-foot tiger shark 15 feet above us, circling over us, between us and the boat. And I think we have parts that bolt just like those fish. Mm-hmm. And so to be really attentive, and because what we had to do in that moment, he just tried to get me because I was like huffing on my regulator was blowing air out of there pretty fast. And he just had me settle and just wait. And we waited for, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. And the shark swam off and we got the hell out of there. Mm-hmm. But, that place of really being in reverence for this movement back into unconscious incompetence is so important.
Well, I think you said it really well. I mean, there's judgment in being incompetent. There's judgment in I can't do this.
Well, there's judgment in it, and judgment has a cognitive component to it. And I think that's definitely there, but I think there's also just a reflexive component to our incompetence that moves us into shame and separation and attachment injury. Like if I'm incompetent, I'm not lovable. And where that is a very excruciating experience, especially if we've never really had a full cup experience of that. It's like where people that have had like really good parenting and attachment and all that stuff, and then, as teens or as adults have trauma, they have a place to go back to as they're healing the trauma. Whereas other people that have never had that, they're kind of ejected halfway to Mars and they don't know where Mother Earth is. Like they don't know how to get back. So it's a tricky little bit here. So maybe here we can talk a little bit about the awareness, acceptance, approval. So those as defined as tools for working in that second stage, where that first one, awareness, is, it's like becoming aware of where I suck, of where I'm incompetent, is usually scary or terrifying or shame or helplessness or all of that. And so that movement that I mentioned before of practicing, of being aware for a moment and then crashing back down into the safety, if you will, of unconscious incompetence, and then eventually finding our way back up more and more, is really, I think there's a level of stoicism in that, to kind of bring that religion or that spiritual practice in, of, being able to sit in the cold water, or being able to, just keep grinding away at digging weeds, or grinding away at, like, wow, I'm
uncomfortable.
I'm uncomfortable.
I'm uncomfortable in what's going on in this.
That's right. That's right. And there's a level of humility in it. Like, I have a couple of Persian clients, and, one of them is practicing Muslim and prays 5 times a day. And, it's this lay your prayer mat out and get on your knees and just be like, I don't know shit, like, to be in that 5 times a day. I'm very appreciative of that. Like, that's a very interesting thing to play in.
In the world of the people that I talk about, we came up with 3 rules a long time ago, and that's always been a little bit of this competency matrix that we're talking about, and the awareness, acceptance, approval components. And what I try to get across to my clients in this process is that awareness piece is that unconscious incompetence piece. I don't know what in the hell I'm doing. And for them, as they are trying
that's what you're aware of, you mean?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Because the awareness is the beginning of the conscious incompetence.
Right. It's the beginning of the conscious incompetence, but also knowing that I'm not competent here, and it's uncomfortable in what I don't know, and I'm trying to do something that somebody is just giving me that I have no really clue about, and it becomes a real white knuckle job for them to just hang in the discomfort of, I'm trying this and it's not working, and I'm still trying to wait to see if it's going to work on some level, and trying to find some level of traction in that, and trusting self to navigate that level of discomfort, not to jump out and just to engage, to just jump into that incompetence that has been the patterning of everything that hasn't worked. Because that's the wiring of the history of whatever as I'm unconscious that's driving this bus, that part,
right,
or whatever is there. And they have to sit in that level of stoicism, like you said, to be in that cold water, that freezing water, and just tolerating that,
and
knowing
breathing
that there is something maybe that is going to change if I'm willing to do that. And that's that beginning of the conscious incompetence, in that disengage. But even in the second level of that disengagement,
review the 3 levels of disengage.
The 3 levels of the disengagement for me over time have been the awareness, acceptance, approval piece. So the first awareness is that beginning of the conscious incompetence of, I don't know what the hell I'm doing here, but I'm going to sit in that and see if there's something else that I can get a hold of. And the second disengagement is the acceptance of, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm looking for the tools to come into some level of competence in that, and to find myself moving from unconscious incompetence into some conscious competence, and really working hard at establishing that as a work project. And the approval component being that stepping into conscious competence, or making the jump from conscious competence into unconscious competence of this just being this is what I do. I've got it in my system. I don't have to think about it. It's just boom, it's there. Mm-hmm. So that's the transition for those three.
It's similar to what I teach. And so one of the adjustments that I really find very important is when I have a moment of conscious incompetence, there's the impulse to just get stoic and like be more like to sit in and own that one awareness. And I think that's important, but the next layer of it is to recognize that most likely there's a whole matrix of it incompetencies around that need to be worked through and take time and perseverance and stoicism and all of those things. And where that's really, to make that leap, that like the piton, that first piton that goes in the wall of the black hole that I've been in, is only one of many. Mm-hmm. And we have an assumption that we have to work out that one thing is all we need, and it's not accurate. Maybe once in a while.
Well, I think that points to this notion that you talked about when we started, or earlier on in this, where you said there's this trap door from this conscious incompetence that takes us right back into the unconscious incompetence. So this matrix that's underlying this is we're trying to create a foundation, and the foundation starts from one point, but one point is not a foundation. There's the matrix of all of those pieces that come underneath, and we've got to start to identify these other places of unconscious incompetence to raise the floor.
Right. And so this is one of the things that I see happening in myself and in a number of clients, is that they start getting that, and then they just go into this feeding frenzy of having insight after insight after insight of different places that I'm incompetent, without ever stabilizing any of them.
Right.
And what I do, and what I encourage my clients to do, is to work in this process of tracking them and tracking which ones are, keystones, like the keystone at the top of an archway. Like you have a brick archway and the keystone is at the top, and it holds all of what's below it together. And so to look for what are the places that I am incompetent that are holding other layers of my incompetence together. So I don't have to remember all 271 of them. I can be with one, maybe there's 2, 3, or 4 or 5, but to really be in this refinement of reviewing on a regular basis, daily, of having a document in my Apple Notes or on a piece of paper or on a whiteboard that I come back to and I look at and go, that one isn't so important now. I'm going to replace it with this one, or I'm going to add this one, or I'm just going to take it off. And to be in this living relationship with my awareness of these layers of incompetence that I'm finding, in a way that can lead to stability. And so that is, this initial piece of awareness has legs in not only the multiplicity of incompetencies, but in the interrelationship of them themselves and me with them as a bunch of incompetencies.
So back to the IFS model, is all of these parts that, as we start to explore, we've got a self that we're working with, hopefully, that we're starting to establish that keystone, if you will, with.
Right.
That we could explore. But as we sit in one piece and it starts to open up for us, we start to understand it, there's another part that is maybe hovering over it, hovering under it, connected to it, protecting it, managing it, and all these other things that we have to start to be able to, oh, hell, there's something else I was not aware of. There's another part here that is at work within this matrix that is governing that piece that I thought I was getting a handle on. And now there's this other piece that I have to come into relationship with. So this is the trap door that you were talking about of the ongoing dropping back into unconscious incompetence and the willingness to not get frustrated with, I thought I had this. You know, one of my teachers talked about the I got it syndrome of now I got this. Oh, shit.
Right.
No, I
Trap door.
Boom. And
which often the trap door, you don't even become aware of the trap door until days or weeks or months or years later. You're like, wait, I thought I had it, but look, I'm now here. Yeah. So I think to circle back again to what you just said in the IFS piece. So I kind of alluded earlier and in other podcasts, this notion of self, and the topic of my podcast, Unveiling Self, really points to that's not so easy to have a sense of what myself is and to be in this ongoing fractal experience of it. And so in this thing we're talking about right now, like in my list of the keystone incompetencies and holding underneath that, the process of looking at my incompetencies is the beginning of an unblending. So the unblending of self from the part that is caught in the incompetence, and where that movement of unblending is what this is about. Like the whole series of podcasts that I'm doing here is about like finding, how do I find my way into unblending from my parts and unveil this being that I am that is rather unfettered with my incompetencies and my unconsciousness, all of which comes from blending with parts. And so this moves into the 3 A's, the awareness, acceptance, approval, this place of like, as I start putting these terms, these names, these pointers to my incompetencies, that's a movement into acceptance. Like, okay, I got this thing, you know, like one leg is shorter than the other. All right, here we go. Like that's, I'm in acceptance of it.
Keep going in circles.
That's right. That's the one-armed guy rowing. So that place of movement in from awareness into acceptance is really key. And then the approval layer is, as I do the IFS work of really getting to know the part in the time and place where it's stuck, to do the time machine work, to go back to the time and place where that part is, to have enough support to really get to know it and be curious and not be pushy, not try and make it be different. And to be like, oh, honey, I get why you're doing this thing. Okay. And that approval really takes the bracing of awareness, the beginning of settling in acceptance, into a drop of like, okay, I got this. I understand this part and this incompetency. And as we get enough of those, something happens where the system spontaneously moves into competence around that. So we don't have to strive for incompetence. We strive for awareness, acceptance, approval at our own pace, not with a big push, but at the pace of the parts. And that becomes how we move into conscious competence, is through awareness, acceptance, approval of our incompetencies. And it becomes very cool.
So there's a piece I want to backtrack on for a second,
Mhm.
because in order to do this, we have to have, again, this metacognitive piece of something is aware of something else, and that's self, or what is that other piece that is aware of this other piece. And one of the traps back into the unconscious incompetence that I've found in some of my own work and some of the work that I've done with my clients is, you said it, this identification of this notion of self in the conversation is sometimes something that we'll identify or we think is that, and it's just a pseudo self. It's not a true piece. It's another part acting as if it is self.
Well, and this is the fractal unveiling of self.
Right.
You know, this question of, am I in self? To say yes has to include the recognition that, yeah, I'm in self, but I've got a lot of places where I'm still blended with parts, and I'm in parts. Mm-hmm. Because the propensity we have to really vigorously stand in the certainty that I'm in self at any particular moment is most likely fantasy.
Right. One of the places that
even Dick Schwartz talks about having parts be around all the time. And I'm like, all right, that gives me permission.
Yeah. So one of the things that happened for me, and I know it's happened for you as well, is you and I are both highly cognitive. Mm-hmm. And that highly cognitive piece is parts trying to mm-hmm. make sense of everything around and put it in order so we can navigate all of that. Mm-hmm. And in that highly cognitive piece, I frequently get lost in, okay, I got this, I'm here, I'm in self. And it's like, no, I'm just trying to figure something out. And that's a part at work trying to figure it out. So to unblend from that and come into the discomfort of, I don't know anything and I can't make any sense of this moment, is really uncomfortable, because that's not a survivable piece from a whole bunch of the other parts that are out here.
Right.
And this is where the chaos comes in. And it's like, I am sitting here just talking about this at the moment, and I can feel a level of nauseousness coming up.
Right.
With that, just that whole recognition
right.
of this component.
So we're, to put this in context, like the three contexts that I teach is the intrapersonal, which is a lot of what we're anchored in mm-hmm. this conversation thus far. Then there's the interpersonal, like being in relationship with romantic other or ex or, kids or whatever. And then the omnipersonal, which is more in the, the large group or the whole planet or the country or the species or whatever, like the Gaia, like that can move into that. And what I think is a portal to open here, because what we've talked about thus far, we're not giving you enough data to be able to solve all of that here in a short little podcast. And what I'm going to do instead is kind of open into what you just touched on, Brooke, of this like anxiety and nausea about looking at all this stuff, which is, I'm found recently this notion called the wicked problem, which is a very intense thing, which points to unsolvable problems. Like this comes out of planning and policy, and there's some of it that shows up in science. And this is a term that's used. And wicked doesn't point to evil. It's pointing to unsolvable or something along those lines. And that we don't have the data that we need to be able to solve it. And so to recognize that there are wicked problems out there is a piece of the puzzle, and to recognize that there are data points that we'll never get. and that we just don't have that possibility. Like I have a number of physicians as clients, and I like to ask them at different points, like, so all of medicine, not just what you know, but all of medicine, how much does all of medicine together understand the human body? And the typical answer is 2%. You know, like from the clients that I've been working with a while, they're like, yeah, 2%. And so that's all of medicine. That's not just them. That's all of medicine. And so to be in that, the humility, there's a place of humility that can come here, which points back to the praying 5 times a day. And to acclimate in that kind of humility and to be oriented to the vastness of the complexity that's at hand, and the vastness of complexity that's intrapersonal, interpersonal, omnipersonal. Like, you know, this notion, like, how well do you know your spouse? And and
how well do they know you?
Well, and how well do you know yourself? Which is really the question that this all sources out of, is like, I don't really know myself. And I'm like, I know way more about myself now than I did 20 years ago. But I know enough about myself now to be able to say with some degree of comfort, I don't know myself. Like, there's a lot more that I got to know here. And where that opens into a state of profound, like, I the more I'm playing with this, the more I'm like, you know, I think enlightenment is 85% or more conscious incompetence.
The notion that I don't know what I know, and I sure as hell don't know what I don't know.
Right.
And I'm not trying to run into the Dick Cheney moniker there, but you know, that's kind of that whole piece of, yeah, I have an experience here, but I don't know what it is. And I certainly don't know what my experiences that I don't know are. It's really this, you know, when I sit in this crazy patterning of every once in a while, I'll get lost in exploration of the nature of everything.
Right.
And I'll get just so far out, and the explosiveness of what I can even remotely hold shatters everything. And I just drop into, what are we doing here?
It's a cosmic joke. But
really...
so to follow that, like, I play with psychedelics from time to time, and, you know, talk to people and do integration with people that have had experiences that they don't know what to make of. And where, you know, you can have a psychedelic experience with like toad medicine or ayahuasca that is just so expanded and so cosmic and so profound. And then, you know, after the journey wears off, or over the next days or weeks, that softens, and people tend to have a crises of grasping to hold on to that. It's like they've had a temporary moment of maybe conscious competence or even unconscious competence, and they want to hold on to it. And I think this becomes parts very quickly. There's a part that feels a lot of shame, that's like, whoa, I want to hang on to just how cosmic and amazing I was or I saw in that moment. And where that becomes a kind of an ego grasping, that is the opposite of that. It's actually a pathology of that and I think a lot of psychedelic medicine and practitioners and, you know, groups and ways of doing this, they're actually using that experience and the pursuit of that experience to keep people in the dependency on psychedelics. And I have a problem with that. And I see that a lot in the last 5 years of the psychedelic renaissance that's happening. And it's tricky. It's tricky, especially when the practitioners that are holding, these sessions are doing it themselves. And they're using their role of being a practitioner to help them bolster into that place of that illusion. Whew, it gets toxic.
It's addictive.
It's psychologically addictive in the way that we're talking about here.
Right. So I think, in all of these realms, coming back to this willingness, this humility of being able to sit in that conscious incompetence and allow that to be the platform of exploration, but of integration, and not trying to make that jump.
Right.
And because that jump is, I don't care where you're at in the process, that jump at some point is going to become elusive. It's going to become slippery, and we're going to come back to a matter of incompetence in any way, shape, or form at any level of progression here. And that doesn't mean that we don't get some competency.
Right.
It doesn't mean that we don't get some competency, but we're always in that slip of back into incompetence. And to be willing to be,
just like we exhale every now and then. We can't just inhale all of our competence. We have to exhale, and that's tricky. It's tricky. Yeah.
Unconscious incompetence. Conscious incompetence.
Right.
And being really in that titration of the two, and feeling that place where it comes together and disperses.
Right.
And waking up and going back to sleep.
And to be okay with that. I have, it's like, especially when clients start getting traction and they start like, wow, I feel really good. I've never felt this good. And then the day or two or whatever later, they're like, oh my God, I'm back where I was. And they just go into this collapse and this angst and this suffering. And they have to, like, I can help them, kind of coach them on like, hey, that's okay. Like, that's how this works. And to get used to that pendulation is almost more important. It's certainly the next step after being able to relax and like have a moment of respite. Being able to understand the pendulation, to understand the inhalation and exhalation, the movement back and forth, and to look for the space in between the being freaked out and being dissociated, or to being like feeling enlightened and good and feeling crappy. Like to look for what's in between those, which isn't a thing. It's not so much describable as this place that we can inhabit of being in both the competence and the incompetence, however that's showing up in any particular moment. And that process is, I think mystics have been pointing to the space in between forever, like since language started, and the shamans and all of that. I think the space in between is the thing. And
one of my teachers always talked about living in the gap, living in the space between.
Right.
So there's another piece along exactly what we're talking about that I want to talk to our listeners a little bit about. And specifically for a moment in this arena of high conflict co-parenting and stuff, because most of the listeners that are listening to this podcast that are coming here for the high conflict component are really trying to do something different. They're really looking to find some level of competency in their world. And that means that
they're aiming for less conflict.
Right. They're aiming for less conflict. They're trying to find a spot of, okay, here is what I can do. But there's this slip over into what the other parent is doing, of wanting for them to come into some conscious incompetence or to come out of their reactivity, or and this notion that that's not going to happen unless that person wants to or is even capable of. And when we're talking in the realms of personality disorder or deep addiction and some of this stuff, that's not available to them.
Mm-hmm.
And to be in judgment of that in them
mm-hmm.
is also to be in judgment of where that exists in themselves, in their own incompetence. And that's a rat tangle. That's a trap of getting stuck in deeper and deeper levels of unconscious incompetence within themselves.
Right.
So this letting go of what the other person can or can't do is essential here.
Right.
As it works internally within yourselves.
Right.
In your own letting go of where you're incompetent or consciously incompetent.
And largely what you're speaking to there needs to happen internally first.
Absolutely.
It's not all of it, because a lot of people have a propensity to be other directed, and they put their center of gravity in the other person, attachment, injury,
right.
neglect, like that's kind of their codependent shtick. But that'll get them started, but then they got to really do the work inside, and they got to be in that place. Like I have several clients in the last couple of years that come in because, like into couple sessions, because they want their partner to be fixed. And they have no clue about what's going on. Like these are couples counseling. It's not divorce counseling like what you do, but they come in and one partner is very either covertly or overtly trying to fix the other person, trying to get me to fix the other person. And that's going nowhere fast. And, because it's just inherently in blame and other directedness. And it's very common and it's understandable. Like they have parts that are doing that. But to become conscious of that is the portal for them to be able to do the intrapersonal work of finding where blame or judgment is a protector, so that they don't have to feel something that's really uncomfortable inside of them that maybe they can't even see. Like this is really where I find the whole neglect and poor attachment or no attachment to be so problematic. It's almost more traumatizing than physical trauma of beating or rape or whatever, because there's such a deep disorientation from this fundamental place that we all deserved, but we didn't all get, of feeling attached, of feeling this interpersonal nourishment.
Having some form of reflection that I actually exist and there's something there that I can start to wrap my hand around. And so that neglect piece, I think, is probably one of the biggest traumas to learn how to navigate.
And to become conscious of. It's like, like I work with people that have had pretty severe trauma, and there's a place where they can orient to the trauma. They can go, all right, this is what I'm working on. This is why I'm neurotic, or why I'm having trouble in relationship, or whatever. And then there are people that come to me and they've been through all kinds of different therapies and models of help, and they're like, I don't understand why I'm such a hot mess. and it's the issue of fish not knowing what water is. You can't see it, you don't know it. And so that's a long, drawn out process of coming into that kind of awareness of the impact that, because the attachment injury is happening at a very young age. It's happening in utero sometimes, it's happening in the, before walking, toddler, and it is so endemic. And it's also, I think this is one of the more important things, is that, for instance, an adult being slapped by the parent is hard. A teenager being slapped by the parent, a 5-year-old being slapped, like these are progressively more and more impactful. The same negative experience down into an infant being slapped is extraordinary. Like that is 1,000,000 times more overwhelming than an adult being slapped. And we don't understand this as a culture, as a place or a model of treatment. We don't understand that the magnification of the impact that very young attachment injury or lack of attachment has. It is 1,000,000 times more than we are willing to recognize. Like people are always saying like, wow, so what? Like,
It's the dissociative piece that at its core is so hard to reach back into.
Right.
And because
it's so excruciating.
Right. And where that dissociation is this trap door, this unconscious incompetence of not being able to relate to that. I've worked with many clients along this path of, I don't remember past an early age. I can't remember. I have no visualization. I've got nothing there because it is so packed away and guarded. And there's so much dissociation with it that it takes them being able to sit in the dissociation,
right,
for it to be able to start to show,
or sit with the dissociation.
Yeah,
jumping all the way into it. And this is really where parts work is so good, because self can sit with the part that is dissociated. And
thanks for that correction, because that's exactly what I was trying to lead with, is sitting with,
because that gives us the titration capacity, because you can really ask the part, just show me a little bit of what it's like for you to be there by showing me in my body what it's like in your body. And, try not to overwhelm me, because if you overwhelm me, I can't really sit with you.
And this is the lovely piece that I was talking about the somatic piece coming in, because each one of these parts, each one of these things that are hiding back here, have a direct tie into our nervous system. Our nervous system is their nervous system. And when they can show us that, we can come into relationship with that. The trap is getting blended with it, or trying to unblend with it. We're going down some real rabbit holes here. We're starting to fractal here a little bit.
Right. Yeah. And I think we're winding out of time here.
Yeah. So
I could talk about this for another 2 hours.
Hell, you and I talk about this for hours on end. It's like, okay, I got to go back to work. And now we're in that component here again a little bit.
Right.
But what I want to just kind of bring back, and from my end of this recap, is this willingness to sit in the discomfort of the instability of the conscious incompetence, noticing that we slip back into the unconscious incompetence, and then we come back into this conscious incompetence, and be willing to stabilize that, and being okay with that, because that's always going to be part of the progression into finding some level of competence in whatever we're trying to track.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I like the notion of pendulation that I think you and I both first got out of Peter Levine and the somatic experiencing work, where that was something we just practiced over and over again when we were learning that. Like, that has become this recognition of weaving. Like, the pendulation itself is weaving together.
Mm-hmm.
The pendulation itself is the space between. It's like the stitches. It's what's connecting that which was fragmented. And it's very cool. It's very cool. Yeah.
All right. So thank you, everybody, again, for coming, spending time with us, picking it up week after week, month after month, year after year, and indulging us in these conversations. And hopefully we're delivering some information that is valuable to you. And in that, you have my gratitude for always showing up. And Eric, for you always showing up for this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This is something I really appreciate doing, and I'm aware in this conversation and all of them, but worth speaking now, is that, you know, for everything that I know, I'm like max 50% sure I'm right. And so the place where I can be sitting here in front of a mic and a camera and talking to you and be talking out of my ass and being wrong is entirely possible. And that really fits into the conversation that we're having, is that there is a level of like humility here that I strive for, and I don't always have. I do get to where I think I know, but my ability to relax into plummeting into awareness that I don't has been growing, and I'm grateful for that. And I hope that the listeners all can learn from that as well, because it kind of makes this a little easier to chew on. So yeah, so thanks for being here with me, Brooke, and thank you, listeners, both of the High Conflict podcast and the Unveiling podcast. Mine should be launching shortly here. I have recorded a bunch of these, and it's going to be launching in July is the current plan. So thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Brooke, people don't have to wait until Friday mornings to get more content. If this is something that's helpful for them, right? This isn't the first time you've broadcast anything or recorded anything or put anything out there in the world. What are the other ways people can get the help more aggressively or speed up their recovery process? What materials are available for people right now?
Well, I've written a book called The Black Hole of High Conflict, and it's available on Amazon and Kindle.
Great.
And everything that we're talking about is really compressed and put into there. So this is a really good starter place to get in and get your mind working and to see what these concepts are about and how to start to apply them. The other place that I think that is valuable is to go to our website and look at some of the blog articles that I've written. Those are available there as well. They go into some of these other arenas, and that's at www.highconflict.net. So the book, the website are also really good places to get the material. And also we have classes. We have high conflict diversion program classes that you can get into and get some one-on-one help with this as well.
And you know me, I'm aggressive. Whatever I want to become good at or learn, I find someone who's good at it and pay them and hire them and shorten my learning curve. What if somebody just wants your help? Somebody says, Brooke has this information. He's good at something I'm not good at yet, and I want to work with him. Do you have any type of coaching or consultations or anything like that?
Absolutely. I do one-on-one coaching for custody cases. I help people get ready for family court services. If you've got that in your community, I work with attorneys and clients to help them with managing and strategically setting them up to have more successful cases as well.
And how do they reach out? You want them to just go to the website or email or phone, or what's the best way for them to reach out, raise their hand, and say, I need some help?
They can email me. My direct email is brook@highconflict.net. That's BROOK at highconflict, HIGH, conflict.net.
Perfect. That's everything everybody would need to get some help, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Brook.